Hi. I wrote this as an essay because in the 2020s we have seen a rise in online discourse of a quite old-school form of social chauvinism. A form of American social chauvinism that doesn't even dare call itself socialist, and it's more honest for it. I would like to demonstrate today that social chauvinists are doomed to fail so long as they don't abandon their reformist and proletarian nationalist tendencies. I hope to at least open discussion of these questions and hopefully convince some of you of a revolutionary internationalist line. Either way, I will focus here on a very online, very American brand of social chauvinism, promoted by what I judge as honest thinking workers who have been led away from Marxism. Atrioc, or as he is known on his Clips channel, Big A, is for all intents and purposes a center-left reformist. He believes that capitalism is a good system that just needs to be improved gradually. He also isn't really interested in discussing imperialism from any other lens than that of whether it's truly in the best interest of the American people for the American military to do imperialism. And here we come at the first major hurdle, which arises in his attempts at genuine analysis of economical issues in America. He inherits the historical failure of social chauvinists to integrate a genuine Marxist class analysis to their worldview. The very base contradictions in capitalism that have been described, studied, and confirmed for over 100 years at this point are still absent from their perspectives, and Atrioc makes no exceptions. Over the last 9 months of Trump presidency, he has repeatedly criticized the administration on various topics, but his critique always stumbles before becoming radical, as in before getting to the root causes of the subject matter. But it's not just for a lack of trying, and I think he's honest in this. His analysis has already grown much closer to Marxism over the last few years, but as the saying goes, Marxists do not grow on trees. You cannot reach the full potential of Marxism without reading the works of past Marxists and without practicing materialist dialectics with comrades and with organized thinking workers. Thus, some things hold up his progress, and I wish to demonstrate them, so that some thinking workers may see this and learn from my arguments and push back if they disagree. Hopefully finding in Marxism a functional path forward to solve the problems they hear about in his daily clips, and thus bringing other comrades on board in the class war. Now, to get in the meat of the argument, we must talk about the affordability crisis in the United States, in his words. What causes it truly? Can it be solved within capitalism? We can answer these questions by looking at one of capitalism's fundamental contradictions. We can start by stating the contradiction of the inevitable, constant overproduction crisis under capitalism. It might seem formalist, but that's pretty inescapable in this tiny essay format. If, for the sake of stating it simply, we imagine an isolated village operating under capitalism, in it we must understand there must be people who own the land and the machines used for production, and other people who own nothing but their own bodies. Such, to satisfy their basic needs, those who have nothing have no choice but to exchange their labor for food, drink, and a roof over their head. When they do so, they produce a certain amount of value for those who own, the bourgeois. We can evaluate how much precisely simply by calculating the amount that would have been produced without the labor of the workers and subtracting it from the total. In this case, we can simply make up a number. Say 2/3 of total production would have been impossible without the labor of the workers. To simplify, we'll say that means the workers produced $1,000 worth of products, worth $10 each. With each one of these products, $5 goes to the workers and $5 are kept by the bourgeois as profit. With their share, the workers pay for lodging, food, and drink. So their $500 are entirely spent, and they have only been able to buy half of the supply. The bourgeois, on the other hand, reinvest 1/3 of their profit in improving their production capacities, and 1/3 in necessities and food. After all, they are less numerous, so they can only consume so much, and keep 1/3 as savings. But it becomes immediately clear with this simple distribution that of the $1,000 of value produced by the workers, only about 800 have been bought. From this position, the bourgeois have two choices: waste the leftover and let it eat into their profits, or expand to other markets to sell their excess stock. But once we understand this equation applies to the globalized scale of current capitalism, we can quite simply understand that this shapes up to be the fundamental contradiction of constant overproduction crises and how they cannot simply expand to another market at this point, right? On the scale of the whole economy, the workers can never buy back all that they have produced because their surplus value has been taken, and the concentration of the profits in the hands of fewer and fewer people means that bourgeois consumption is ever shrinking. This obviously is very theoretical and doesn't go in all the nuance that exists in actuality, but it can help us fundamentally understand the cycle of booms and busts that characterize capitalism. This contradiction can be found in the material basis for the current AI bubble, housing bubbles, and generally refutes the base idea that private corporations seeking profits can lead to a healthy economy. Now that the explanation is finished, we can go into the specifics of how the understanding of this principle can and must serve to analyze issues in capitalist economies. Without it, you cannot come to functioning solutions, and you risk simply repeating ineffective common sense or tried and true solutions. This is a fundamental error of all reformists, but social chauvinists are the most egregious offenders generally. Today, I might have cited Ezra Klein's Abundance as the most transparent written form of this error, but historically, others such as Kautsky and Plekhanov, and many more, have made the exact same blunders in very transparent manners or very hidden manners. And their proposed solutions fall apart like a well-smoked brisket as soon as we apply any scrutiny to them. The affordability crisis is just the most transparent representation in the organic crisis of globalized capitalism, of the perpetual overproduction contradiction of capitalism. I'll develop this point a bit by explaining how exactly the affordability crisis is a direct consequence of this contradiction. When the expansion to different markets becomes impossible because every market has already been reached by global capitalism, the only way to continue the infinite growth of profits companies are legally held to can only be accomplished by raising prices or cutting costs, aka cutting salaries or workers directly. Thus, workers can buy less and less of what is produced, deepening the crisis. Protectionism is also a direct attempt at turning back the clock on this crisis. But as Trotsky said, you cannot put the alligator back in the chicken egg, and thus protectionist policies are doomed to fail and once more deepen the crisis. Another reformist idea is to attempt to fix it with government spending or deregulation, which historically also leads to a deeper hole and a more radicalized working class. This cycle continues until the revolutionary class either accomplishes its historical task or until we descend into barbary, as we did after the failed international revolutions of the early 20th century. I could go more in depth, but I think I would be losing the general interest of this essay as a bird's-eye critique of a current wave in social chauvinism. Instead, let me talk a bit on imperialism and what we can learn as 21st century thinking workers from Lenin's synthesis of Bukharin's work, and how this understanding can help us deconstruct the reactionary consequences of social chauvinist rhetoric. The US, as the first imperialist and reactionary power in the world, relies on its powerful army to secure the interests of its monopolized bourgeoisie abroad and in turn at home. That is the first and foremost purpose of the Department of War, the CIA, the FBI, the police, and all other militarized section of the US government. That must be established and understood for any constructive discussion on the subject. If you doubt what I assert here, a shallow look at the history of the American bourgeoisie's wars abroad and repression at home should quiet the disagreement, because if they did it for hundreds of years, why would they have stopped in the last 10? These interventions are repackaged as being in the interest of the American workers through two main arguments, both misleading and wrong. First, and this one is common among all imperialist warfare, so much so that Bukharin described it in great detail in 1917, the imperialist bourgeois media will describe the economic interests of their bourgeoisie as being American interests or any other imperialist nation's interests. When I have never really seen Raytheon or ExxonMobil do profit sharing with American workers. We say the workers of the world have no borders because when the American workers are being sent to die abroad for the flimsy chance at going to college or for an overpriced car, they are defending the interests of their masters, not their own. The same bourgeoisie that built and maintains a system in which those aren't easily attainable for workers of the richest country on earth. A thought experiment might illustrate how absurd it is to think that participating in the genocidal imperialist warfare the US commits abroad is in the workers who do its interests can go as follows. If I withhold food from my dog, unless it regularly mauls my neighbor's dogs, the dog has only one path to freedom, only one path of action that can satisfy its immediate and long-term interests at once, mauling me and eating to its hunger. The situation is much the same for those who enact their bourgeoisie's criminal acts abroad. The only path to meet their immediate and long-term interests in the same movement is to string their warmonger, genocidal bourgeoisie up by their feet. The second usual argument, much less common in the Trump administration, is the idealist notion that the United States military must intervene throughout the world to defend the ideas of democracy and freedom, in words. In the material world, what these words mean is that the United States military must uphold the precise Overton window of dictatorship of the bourgeoisie the American bourgeoisie considers acceptable. And I think there truly isn't a way to argue against this false notion without proving that all workers have an innate interest in revolutionary proletarian action throughout the world, and thus in the failure of the American military to maintain this Overton window. For a quick introduction to this part, you can read or watch the essay I made yesterday on this exact topic, and assuming what is argued in that video is understood, I will build on top of it now. I want to start with a practical real-world example. When the workers of Iran rose up in the 70s against the American-backed dictatorship of the Shah, an alliance of circumstance was made with the Islamic resistance, the Ayatollahs, which at first glance was also revolutionary and against the Shah. That alliance ended up killing the revolution in the egg, and the Islamic revolutionaries put in place a bourgeois theocracy which gradually took back every single hard-fought progress the revolution had won, from local workers' control to LGBT rights. At first glance, and without a truly revolutionary internationalist outlook, it may seem that this is all there is to say about the Iranian Revolution, and thus that the American efforts for regime change in Iran are bad but inexplicable. Why would they do it? We, however, can assert that the revolutionary struggle that took place 50 years ago in Iran contains innumerable lessons for contemporary revolutionaries across the world, and many of those lessons have been learned by the Iranian working class. Over the last decades, new waves of revolutionary organization have taken place in Iran, and the theocracy's position was much weaker than ever before in the last decade. But what better to reinforce and secure their position than to acquire a genuine enemy on the outside that supposedly wishes for regime change in Iran? There you can find the real effect of American intervention in Iran this year. It stifled Iranian resistance against their government, and that is its reactionary effect. This is the true reactionary role of the American army in all periods of its existence. It works tirelessly to maintain the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie over the workers of the world. Any support, tacit or otherwise, for the army as an institution should thus scream alarm bells for any thinking worker. Graham Plattner, through his position on the army, demonstrates exactly this reactionary bourgeois position, in lieu of any moralistic judgment of his personality or his past failings. Failing to understand and describe this puts social chauvinists such as Atrioc or Hassan Piker in direct opposition with the interests of the workers they wish to defend. Internationalism is the only way to victory for all workers, regardless of where they live. Without it, regardless of how pure your intentions, you will always end up serving bourgeois interests. There is no opposition safer for the bourgeoisie than that of the social chauvinists. And if Atrioc truly wishes to fight for the interests of the American workers, as he claims, and get money out of politics, he will have to adopt a proletarian and thus revolutionary position, or end up on the side of the bourgeoisie with every Democrat and Republican, hopefully the losing side. If you agreed or disagreed with what I said today, feel free to leave a comment or contact me or one of my comrades of the Revolutionary Communist International. This is not an official video, but I know my comrades, they can discuss this with you. But as I said yesterday, the fight for an internationalist revolutionary communism isn't online. It's out there, in the streets, in the workplaces, in the unions, and everywhere else the bourgeoisie has extended its dirty little tentacles.